Greetings, IoT Village. I hope you're all doing well. My name is Victor Hanna, and I currently work as a senior security consultant slash IoT researcher with the Trustwave Spider Labs team. Thanks for welcoming me to the IoT Village virtual event 2.0. It's a really great honor to have been selected as one of the speakers and looking forward to it. Today, I'll be taking you through the Magic Home Pro device takeover and authentication bypass that I uncovered late last year, end of 2020. Thanks in advance for taking the time to listen to my talk, and I really hope that it is informative and that it sheds some light on just how important IoT security is for us in our community. And with that, let's jump straight in. So as a little bit of background on how an off-the-cuff, off-the-shelf product purchase essentially turned into a curious case of IoT device research. The journey started with an attempt to literally brighten up things for my two kids while during the extended COVID lockdown period. So I decided to purchase an off-the-shelf LED strip light device that, with the thought that it would act as a way to brighten or add some character to their surroundings or their room, whilst having them deal with extended periods of time indoors. Based on that initial curiosity and with efforts at kind of curing my own boredom, I decided to put my kind of security researcher hat on and turn my efforts at essentially researching the product to tease out any potential weaknesses that the device might have. This talk essentially describes the road to the ultimate finding and verified CVE based on the initial inquisitiveness and subsequent research efforts. Okay, so the main usage for the LED strips is to adhere the LED strips to either a wall or other surface, and connect the strips to 12 volts via a step-down transformer, at which point you should be able to adequately prettify your space with lots of LED light love. The following excerpt is a part of the product description as advertised on the website, which describes the product quite succinctly, I thought, and gives a brief description of just how easy it is to basically set and forget given the product's revolutionary plug-and-play functionality. So as you can imagine, even at this early stage of the research cycle, I started to hear tiny alarm bells, but nevertheless, I made the purchase and waited the efficient Amazon delivery of said product. So once the product arrived and I looked at installing the LED strips via the foam tape and connected into mains power, making sure to hide cables for a seamless, beautiful finish. Unfortunately, I don't have photos of that finish. However, believe me, it was fantastic. After which I thought to present my impressive installation skills to the unsuspecting duo. They were impressed for all but 5 seconds. Okay, so after the underwhelming lack of surprise by the duo, I started curing my boredom by mapping the attack surface. So an attack surface mapping simply describes the components that are used within the target system and how those components are used to either control or interact with the system itself. This is useful as a security researcher as it kind of allows for the building of associated threat model, which can be then used to basically formulate potential attack vectors. There were three main technology categories that piqued my interest. In the case of IR, or infrared, although playing with discrete codes has always been greatly fulfilling, I considered it of low priority based on the required close proximity to the target device, and really wanted to just focus on something with a little more substance and reach. Wi-Fi is used based on the ability to attach the LED strip to the home Wi-Fi and control its behavior with the associated mobile application, either over the internal Wi-Fi or remotely via the cloud API endpoints. So based on this, I ultimately decided to focus in on the Wi-Fi and the mobile application as the technology targets of interest. So like most other humans or humanoids, I am a visual creature, and so normally a picture paints 1,000 words. So the following illustration shows just how things fit together based on the reconnaissance and attack surface map. So as can be seen, the mobile application running on the handset is actually attached to both the internal Wi-Fi segment as well as the back-end services within the cloud infrastructure through a cellular connection. This allows the mobile application to act as a conduit or gateway to the cloud and LED strip controller, respectively. So too, the LED strips interconnect via a LED strip Wi-Fi controller to the internal Wi-Fi segment. And just noting that the mobile application in the illustration is able to communicate with the cloud via the internal Wi-Fi or additionally over the cellular network. So both of those are available. Okay, so now we will turn our focus onto the mobile application. Specifically, that is, the Magic Home Pro version 1.5.1. which is the affected version, the one that I tested. So this mobile application seemingly looked to do a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of controlling and managing the LED light strip. So I subsequently turned my attention at examining what was, effectively under the hood of the mobile application itself. So as a precursor or a little sidestep into the tool sets that I use to allow for investigations into the mobile app itself, these are pretty common across the board when dealing with mobile penetration testing. But what we have is Frida, which is the tool. It's an invaluable tool and highly recommended, in my opinion. It allows for bypasses of things like SSL pinning, for instance. The way in which it achieves this is through hooking into processes on the target app, which can then be used to run logic of our own. We also have Burp Suite, which is kind of the well-known, renowned proxying tool, which essentially allows us to proxy HTTP transit flows, and also gives us the ability to manipulate these flows, as well as a plethora of other functionality. We also have Genymotion, which is a Android emulation software. In the case you don't necessarily have a spare rooted device on hand, this comes in really, really handy. And JW GUI, which is, after conversion of an APK to Java, we can then throw the file into the JW GUI utility to view the decompiled class files for interesting entries. So each of these tool sets deserves a definite isolated talk in and of itself. So I won't spend much more time going through this, but there is a super amount of information out there on the interwebs if interested. Okay, so back on track and with tool sets on hand, I went about installing the mobile application and interfaced it with an intermediate proxy with the view to capture interesting traffic. After capturing some, traffic flows, including the authentication flow, the first flow that caught my immediate attention was one that utilized a HTTP GET request alongside the device MAC address as a parameter, which elicited a response that returned 4 interesting JSON elements. Binded uni ID, which is associated with every single individual endpoint. The user unique ID, this is the user unique identifier, and a username, and that's the username of the currently logged in user. Last but not least was the token, and it describes the associated JWT or JSON Web Token. More on this one later, actually, as it plays a really important role in the device takeover that we will eventually be able to conduct. So, given that most of the details were able to be potentially manipulated using Burp Suite, I then tried my hand at possible IDOR vectors. IDOR is simply, for those that aren't unaware, is an insecure direct object reference, which normally occurs when an application provides direct access to objects based on user-supplied input, allowing you to manipulate objects directly. I wanted to specifically use the MAC address parameter as my target, which proved quite useful actually, as I found that I was able to now enumerate all cloud-connected MAC addresses simply by using the MAC address parameter as my fuzzing target. I put together a script in order to help me in this effort, and voila, the floodgates opened. So as you can see in the slide, essentially what we have returned is based on the random MAC address identifier, we have associated user unique IDs and binded IDs. So wait, what? Does this mean that based on my current level of authorization, that I am able to enumerate every connected Magic Home Pro device in the world? Yes is the answer. In fact, taking into consideration the 24 bits allocated to the serial number of the device, this meant that 2 to the 24 devices would be potentially affected by this authorization flaw. Okay, so now I want to see which of these returned JSON elements might be useful as a leverage point into further exploitation using the logic that authorization may just be a little weak, to say the least. Before delving in deeper into the potential JSON parameters and authorization weaknesses, I started poking around at the traffic and further intercepted traffic flows, which uncovered discrete hex codes that turned out to be a method in which to switch on and off the LED lights. So having this newfound knowledge on hand, I scripted up another Python to assist to see if the captured hex codes were in fact real and usable outside of the mobile application itself. As it turns out, the answer to my query was, again, yes. So this slide shows the hex data discrete code used to turn on the LED strip. And this slide shows the hex data discrete code used to turn off the LED strip. And so, not unlike my previous efforts, I created another script to assist in automating this process as well. Okay, so what we know up until now is that we can now control the end device outside the mobile application. So what else can we actually do? Okay, so now, given the fact that we seem to be dealing with weak authorization, I turned my attention back to the JWT, so JSON Web Token, and looked into its structure within the payload data section of the token itself. So as it turns out, 2 of the 4 parameters are encoded into that section, namely the uni ID and the user ID. Now, if I could just find a way to re-sign the JSON Web Token using alternate parameters, then there may be a chance that I could forge a token with new data. After looking into it, I stumbled across a well-known JWT security bypass vulnerability that allows a JWT to be essentially downgraded to use an algorithm of none within the header section of the token. This simply translates to the ability to now be able to re-sign a JWT token using new data without the need to verify the entire JWT with an encrypted verified signature, because tokens using the None algorithm are already considered verified in the standard. Given the known JWT vulnerability, I wondered if it was possible to couple this vulnerability with requests made through the app, the mobile app, to elicit further unwanted functionality. Hang on, before successful forging of a JWT can take place, let's look at the anatomy of the JWT itself. The JSON Web Token essentially consists of three sections. The header section, which details the algorithm being used to sign the token, and the type, which in our case is JSON Web Token. The payload section, this details the various JWT claims, where a claim is simply a place where you would place data to be transmitted. There are three types of claims. These consist of registered claims, which are those of which they're reserved. So examples of such a claim would be an ISS, which describes the issuer of the token, for instance. The second type is public claims, which are those of which that are essentially created by the developer. A username would be similar to that, for instance. And private claims, which are essentially kept private between producer and consumer of a JWT. And the last section is the signature section. This is a HMAC that is made up of a header, payload, and secret, which is essentially held by the server, and is used to verify that the data contained within the JWT is actually verified. So with each of these sections, each of the sections are base 64 encoded and then concatenated using a period or full stop, and kind of spliced together at that point. So now that we've got a better understanding of how to formulate a JWT, we can now attempt to forge one using the signature bypass vulnerability. So to start with, I attempt to forge a JWT using my username and unique ID and use it in a request as an initial proof of concept. So I formulated another script to automate the process with a slide showing the emitted output, which is essentially the forged token. Now, with the newly forged token on hand, I then attempt the previous used light on discrete hex code request using the newly forged token, which thankfully ended up as a success. Wow, so at this stage, I am now wondering what other operations we might be able to execute using this methodology. So as it turns out, one such operation is the sharing of a device with a friend. So I set my sights on whether this might be a viable method in which to take over a device using any logged in user account. The answer to this question was also yes. By providing the post request with relevant parameters, those of which we previously gleaned through our enumeration efforts, through the IDOR, we can utilize the forged token to take over the control of a device. So this slide shows the HTTP post request and response used to elicit the device takeover. It incorporates the friend user ID parameter, which we populate with our attacking email address, and the MAC address parameter, which is the device MAC address that we're looking to take over. This slide shows the trusty script used to take over the device, shown on the left, followed up with the confirmation that the actual target that we were attacking is now under the control from within the Magic Home Pro mobile application, which is the picture shown on the right. This brings us to the inevitable ultimate vulnerability, which all this research and efforts have led up to. So I decided that to make things easier to manage from an attacker's perspective, that taking over the device and managing it using the mobile application itself would be really cool. The authentication process of the mobile app consists of a post request made with 3 JSON parameters: a user ID, a password, which is hashed, and a client ID. Of these 3 parameters, the only one that is used is the user ID itself. However, the JWT is also used within a successful login attempt in the HTTP response, which must include both the username and user unique ID, both of which we have access to. So, as long as we know a way to reforge a JWT, we should theoretically be able to bypass authentication without the need to provide a valid password, as we should be able to intercept and manipulate the response using our forged token. So this slide shows the initial post request using an arbitrary password within the JSON parameter, the original response, and then the edited response using our forged token that attacker can then inject into the communication flow. In order to forge the JWT for the previous attack, I set up another script which incorporates all the required parameters, in this case username and unique user ID. The forge of the token then takes place with the output being a nicely structured HTTP response template that we can place straight into the intercepted communications and thus bypass authentication. Okay, so at this point, I wanted to share a somewhat live authentication bypass using the previously outlined method. This clip is showing an attempt at login using a false password, which we are then greeted with login failure HTTP response, at which point we can then manipulate the HTTP response using our forged token and respective HTTP response header. This then allows access into the mobile application and thus full control of the device under control of that user. Okay, gang, so that's all from me. At this point, I'd like to greatly thank you all for taking the time to participate and listen to this talk. I'd like to extend a really huge thank you to the IoT Village for allowing me to share my content. Please feel free to connect with me via Twitter, and please visit the Spider Labs blog site for all things vulnerability related. I will be in the Discord server later today, so please feel free to share and connect. Thanks again.